in your opinion, what is the hardest thing veterinarians have to deal with? And I know it depends on each person, but what is it? Is it client? Is it euthanasia? Is it cost of care? Which one do you think causes the most harm to the veterinarian's psyche right now?
I've been thinking a lot about this. And past versions of me would have just stuck to it depends. But the current version of me will say the moral complexity of the work that remains unspoken about and therefore unaddressed. Hands down.
So moral injury,
Mm.
is it?
I believe that that is very close to the top, if not at the top.
Yeah. What is a veterinary social worker?
Yeah. So a veterinary social worker, first and foremost, is a social worker. And then we specialize in supporting people and humans that are impacted by human animal relationships. And I think even for people in veterinary social worker, in social work, like we're still trying to grapple with and get our heads around the different parts that it encompasses. So let alone the average person in the field trying to understand it, right? So let me just try to break it down for a bit. We're trained as social workers first. And then, like all social workers, we figure out the areas that we're passionate in, the areas that we specialize in. In vet social work, here are some examples. What I do is I focus on workplace well being. Not all vet social workers do that, right? So for me, that means helping to mitigate the impacts of the stress and trauma that's built into the work. For other vet social workers, they might be focused on end of life issues and pet loss and supporting clients and community with end of life decision making and support after the loss. That's a part of my practice that I did for about, I want to say about 15 years as well. And then you also have vet social workers that might specialize in animal assisted interventions. So the use of service animals, for example, in nonprofit settings and hospital settings. But then we also have some vet social workers that are focused on the link. So the link between violence against humans and violence against animals. And so I think as we're kind of getting to know what vet social work is, it's really just important to remember we work in a lot of different settings. Animal hospitals is just one setting, but I think that's the area that's probably getting the most attention because, particularly in the States, that's where people are being hired as vet social workers. But the more that I talk to people in my network, like for example, I was speaking at a symposium over the weekend, and one of the participants was a social worker. She's like, I'm doing this work in the nonprofit world. I just had no idea you called it vet social work. So, as we're starting to expand and understand what social work practice looks like across the world, I think it is safe to say there's a lot of people that are doing parts of vet social work, but aren't necessarily calling it that. In small animal practice in particular, that's where the terminology is really starting to pick up because if you're a corporate owned or a small private hospital and you want to hire a social worker, you're probably going to hire it under the designation of a vet social worker.
And that's very interesting. So, did you go to school knowing that you wanted to be a vet social worker, or is that obviously I from reading all your bios and some of your interviews, it was due to your loss of your pet. Um, I think his name was Monty, right? If I'm not mistaken. And it, was that the trigger that like, man, veterinarians need help, or now I think I understand what veterinarians are going through?
No. So, yes and a no. You're absolutely right. It was Monty that got me into this work. But for me, it was something that just made common sense. That so basically, just to back up a bit, when Monty passed away, I was just finishing up my master's of social work. And he was like our family dog, the first animal that had touched my life so deeply. The grief was really deep and real. And I remember being in the depths of that grief, thinking, I cannot possibly be alone in this. Never once did I think I'm the only person. And so then that naturally led me to believe, well, if I'm not the only person going through this, Where are people getting support for this? I was blessed that back in 2004, there was a support group. Like that was unheard of in 2004. I had to drive about an hour to get to it, but I went religiously every weekend with my sister for a few months. And it was life changing. And so, as I'm thinking I'm not alone, there's not a lot of supports out there. What I started to do with Monty's loss is I got involved in pet loss first. And then in 2008, I approached a small animal hospital in Toronto. And I said, listen, I'm trained as a social worker. I'm also certified as a grief counselor. I've gone through my own lived experience. I've really come to understand the human animal bond. What would you think about bringing me on board as a support system for your clients? And again, keep in mind, this was 2008. People weren't doing this back then, but this practice was just ahead of its time and said, yeah, let's try it. And it was actually in that experience, being immersed in the hospital culture, that I started to notice other things. So now it just wasn't about end of life challenges and loss of patients and animals. It was also what the behaviors that I was noticing. There was a lot of people being numbed out, checked out, withdrawal, like in withdrawal. I'm talking about staff. And I couldn't put my finger on why the culture felt the way that it did. But this hospital had three settings, like three locations, and I was noticing it across all three locations. Anyways, needless to say, that got me very curious because I was coming from nonprofit work where I was exposed to trauma left, right, and center. But we talked about the cases, we processed them, we worked through the ethical complexity of our cases. There was just more free communication. And even back then, we were talking about the importance of emotional boundaries and how to take care of ourselves. And so to me, it just felt like something's off. I experienced my own secondary traumatic stress while I was at the hospital, which led to me leaving about a year to a year and a half after. That's what sparked my interest in understanding what was happening in people's internal landscapes working in this field. So at that time, I went and got certified as a compassion fatigue specialist and started to dabble in this. And now, essentially, what I do full time is I support not just animal hospitals, but also SPCAs, shelters, and a zoo in navigating what that survival stress and built in workplace trauma exposure does to people on the inside. And then how that is impacting how not just we're showing up in this work, but also how our organizations are structured and what that does to the internal landscape as well.
And you just said a magic phrase, and I would like, well, there's two things that I'm still trying to get someone to really truly define. Number one, what is, when you said emotional boundaries, how do you set a boundary without checking out as well? Like like when I think of a boundary, I think of a as a wall I put up. Like I'm not going to pass this wall. So how does someone define boundary, and especially how do you put your emotions behind a boundary?
Such a great question. And I'm all in the world of nuance. And I don't think it's ever either or. I'll give you an example. The work that I do requires me to be in the depths of people's pain and suffering. For me, an emotional boundary doesn't mean that I put up, let's just say here, this invisible wall so that I can stay with you without absorbing it. It means I can separate your lived experience from mine and still hold empathy and an energetic presence to be with you in that experience. But I don't absorb it as if it is mine because I have underlying beliefs about people in their journey, which is it is A, not my job or my responsibility, nor should it be, for me to save or fix you from your experience. because I believe there is a tremendous amount of power in your experience. But what my role is, depending on if I'm showing up as a therapist, a coach, whatever it might be, is to be able to attune to you in that experience so that you don't feel alone and that you're getting this space to be seen and heard. But when we're done our conversation, multiple things might happen. Maybe I do need to pay attention to that energy that's still living inside of me as a result of our conversation. And then I need to go inwards and take care of myself. So, boundary here doesn't mean not feeling. Maybe I did feel, but it's what I do with that feeling after that matters. There's not this residual buildup of the energy because I'm recognizing what it's doing to me and I'm taking care of myself in the process. And other times, I'll give you another example. I was doing a critical incident stress debrief with a shelter a couple of weeks ago, and the details of what were being shared with me, if I even let myself start to visualize it or feel it, it probably would have consumed me in the moment. And that's where I did need a version of compartmentalizing to not take it on, but still be present with them. So to me, it's this gray where I'm constantly discerning when do I need to compartmentalize and then check in with myself after? When will I feel a little bit more when I'm in conversation with somebody because I can feel my capacity can hold it, but yet still checking in with myself after. And this is the piece on when we're relating it back to animal care work or veterinary medicine. There's no two ways around it. We are going to be exposed to the emotionality of people and animals' experiences. To suggest otherwise is false because this is a profession built on connection. Few things. I don't think that we have fully acknowledged it and B, set up systems or processes to allow people to actively recover. We have left it to, well, put up the wall, compartmentalize, and compartmentalize has now meant don't feel ever anything at all. So now we just suppress. Or what we're seeing is if people are experiencing emotions, they're deemed too sensitive, not fit for the job. But it's also because there's a flooding that's happening in their systems and they don't know what to do with it because the system and the pace of the work is not pausing for any moment to allow that to be felt and released naturally. And so people are just carrying. Whether you're compartmentalizing it or whether you can't stop feeling it, you're carrying it. So, what are we actually doing to support people as they carry it? And what I see, and I hope this, I listen, I'm going to imagine this is the norm from everything I hear. We don't make space for it.
There is no time for it. There's no way. There's no time for it. And
No.
so I wrote a paper, and I'd like to get your opinion on it. How much compartmentalization can a body take without finally talking to somebody about it or releasing it or doing something like that? Because compartmentalization, that's just a whole bunch of stuff stacking on.
Yeah.
And then it's when you compartmentalize, I think you kind of just, you put it in the back of your brain. It really doesn't linger in the front, but eventually that all adds up. And for me, that happened with me when right before I retired. It was euthanasias. I would actually go outside and vomit before I would have to do a euthanasia. But I had been doing euthanasias for 27 years. But finally my body was like, that's it. That's it. So at what point do you believe that someone needs to really sit down with an actual specialist and have discussions about everything that's going on?
It's a great question. I mean, if we think about compartmentalization, by definition, it is meant to be short term. So, what happens then when what is meant to be a short-term coping strategy becomes what I call an adaptive pattern. Because I think, and I'm going to get to your, like, I'm going to try to get to an answer in a minute. Short-term coping would be, yep, I need to put that wall up to get through this. It doesn't mean that you always need to be talking about it with people or crying. But if it's short term, then at some point, whether that's during your shift or after, we are checking in with ourselves, connecting to ourselves, giving ourselves what we need. Also, that might be in relationship and in community. So it doesn't mean I have to do everything by myself. Maybe it's connecting with my partner and getting that hit, right? Of I'm not shut down in this moment, I'm connected. Because there's compartmentalization and then there's connection. And I think generally we have moved really far away from pure, meaningful connection as a way of recovery. Regardless, compartmentalization is no longer compartmentalization when we're in what I call an adaptive pattern. So, what could that look like? Adaptive pattern of numbing out, an adaptive pattern of only staying up here in the cerebral thinking mind and totally disconnected from my heart and my body. By the way, there's nothing wrong with these adaptive patterns. They're adaptive, they're helping us survive. An adaptive pattern is overworking, staying busy so that I don't have to face anything else that's simmering under the surface. An adaptive pattern is perfectionism. If I can get everything just right, then I never have to deal with the discomfort of it going wrong. An adaptive pattern is people pleasing, quote unquote, the fawning response, making sure everyone else is good so I don't have to feel the discomfort within if it's not. Like I could go on these adaptive patterns, but that's what happens. So to me, I think a more helpful place, and this is what I do in a lot of my psychoeducation with teams, is get to know your adaptive patterns. Get to know how you have learned to survive and cope, because in there is going to lie the magic.
Yeah.
Because the adaptive patterns actually help us. So we're not trying to get rid of them, right? There's something beautiful in all of those that has helped us survive. But then we also want to shine a light on, like, what are the parts of the protective or adaptive pattern that aren't helping us? And that's where I think working with a professional, whether it's like a veterinary social worker, a psychotherapist, somebody who understands how the body copes over time, that's where I see a lot of change happen for people. I get it. Systems are not necessarily changing, but I'm learning myself better. And then I start to understand what I need to be able to cope in this system, which might look very different than what it is for you, right? Because I've got some people that I'm working with where we're trying to move out of adaptive states of numbing out.
Mm.
But then I also have some people that I'm working with that are stuck in high states of hypervigilance. And so what everyone needs is going to look a little bit different.
Well, the scary thing is like all those adaptive patterns you mentioned are ones that have been linked to mental health, mental distress, emotional exhaustion, despondency.
Mm.
I mean, all the things that we look at that are wrong with the quote unquote veterinarian, right? So adaptive patterns basically are the trigger for a lot of our issues, in my opinion. Are there certain adaptive patterns that scare you the most, more than others?
No,
They all worry you?
none of them scare me. This is
Then
going to
not,
sound odd. They don't scare me.
they don't scare you. Do
No.
they worry you? If I mean, because I would think the more adaptive patterns that people can come up with, the more they're setting themselves up for a very hard landing.
You know what does worry me? What worries me is that we are in a profession that doesn't understand adaptive patterns. That concerns me. The adaptive pattern itself, we can actually work with that. And even to back up for a minute, from more of
Mhm.
a nervous system lens, I mean, we are wired for survival. When you are in a system that is not conducive to health and well-being, we need our bodies to adapt. Could you imagine if it didn't? We wouldn't be able to keep functioning as a profession. So I subscribe to the belief that adaptive patterns are necessary, especially in a system. When I say system here, I'm talking about our ways of working that force us to be in those patterns to begin with. So, like, two things have to be happening simultaneously. The systems and the ways of working need to shift, and people need to be better understanding their adaptive patterns. Because here's the thing, if I'm working with somebody who is in a chronic state of shutdown, there's a reason. Shutdown in the modern mental health world would be labeled clinical depression. From a nervous system perspective, shutdown and immobilization means your body is incredibly wise at understanding it cannot take any more input. And so it's moving into a state of preservation. Now, if I'm just going to try to pull someone out of that adaptive pattern, they are now incredibly vulnerable and won't be able to cope at all in a system that hasn't changed. So, in my work with folks, I'm respecting the adaptive pattern and then very gently looking to see what are the parts that we can start to stretch out a little bit. So, if you have numbed out, we don't want you to just start feeling everything all at once and opening up this can of worms that your system won't be able to handle. We're going to like titrate in small doses. That's why the idea of the pattern itself doesn't scare me. I think the behaviors that come from the adaptive patterns make work really hard
Yeah.
because, right, you've got a team now full of people with adaptive patterns that don't understand their own, let alone each other's. And then you've got the lack of psychological safety, the lack of repair after conflict. So, yeah, that part is concerning. But I still come back to the bigger concern for me is we're not actually seeing it that way. We're labeling people's behaviors without understanding what's actually causing them to begin with.
Well, yeah. Now you just sent me down another rabbit hole, and I took a note for because of it. Because the one thing my dissertation found, and granted, I didn't have that many samples, but I definitely want more. But I looked at 23 veterinarians, and I looked at their cortisols and their sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
And what was very interesting is that it was about at about 5 years out, you could see the spike 30 minutes of cortisol 30 minutes after waking up go way higher than normal, and then it crashes throughout the day. Well, and the thing is that if you looked at my very small subset, because it was just a dissertation, versus nurses had a 73% higher spike 30 minutes after they woke up. So if you just looked at that, you would be like, you know what? Nurses are worse off than veterinarians. But that's not what I found. What I did find is that once you're out 8 years or greater, you have absolutely no cortisol spike. Your cortisols are blunted throughout the day. So the body starts running off or fight or flight for everything.
Got it.
So I think that this is very important. You bring up all these adaptive things, and if people don't take care of, or at least talk to someone, or start to realize their adaptive patterns, physiologically, your body is getting destroyed. So I want to thank you for sending me down another rabbit hole. I got to see if there's any correlation between that.
Can I just tell you, as I'm hearing you say that, I knew it in my bones. I've known this in my bones for years. However, to hear you give those numbers, unfortunately, validates everything that I see and why, for me, and I'm not saying this is the be all and end all to veterinary well being, but for me, everything for me starts with nervous system health. Everything. Because we can't talk about effective leadership practices, effective communication, building psychological safety, all these buzzwords in the field that have very good merit, but we're asking people to do things that their systems are not ready for. And so I feel like we're honestly, sometimes it feels like that old, that phrase of the hamster wheel. We can sit through a beautiful conference, a beautiful training on, yeah, maybe I'm going to take little tidbits, but then I go back into practice and I don't know, random example, I've got a client raising their voice at me and I move into freeze, I move into shutdown, I move into fight. And all those communication skills we learned are out the door because your brain and your nervous system are literally in survival mode. And so that's why for me, like, I hope this shifts in 5, 10 years and I can focus on something else. But
Mm.
right now, my sole mission is to help people understand how their nervous systems function exactly because of what you just said.
Well, you said communication skills that we learned.
Mm,
Where? Don't tell me school. Do not tell me school,
no.
because those communication skills are not effectively taught at a veterinary school level. They are, and also the other thing, going all the way back to you realizing your emotions and you compartmentalizing and all that, that's all emotional intelligence, right? And when the client is yelling at you in the room, again, that is emotional intelligence, and that is something else that's completely overlooked,
Mhm.
starting at who we accept into the profession onward. It takes, it's an art form. It really truly is an art form to sit there and be able to, what I do when a client's upset is I just bring a stool, I sit down and I just listen. And and it it's very hard for a lot of these perfectionists to understand why a client's upset at them. And that's why I said, does that perfectionism word scare you? Because it does for me, because I think if you have people who want to be perfect, they are not realizing they're practicing, not perfecting veterinary medicine. Um, so, are there communication skills that are taught in Canadian vet schools differently than the
N-
States?
Not necessarily.
Or is
Not
it communication skills you teach them?
I think it's professional development, right? So
Mm.
it's the conferences, it's the mini courses you can purchase. But then again, that's really just up to the person to access. It's not built into and it's not shaping the way of profession. And coming back to your point on emotional intelligence, we know that there's kind of four major quadrants, and two of those quadrants are our internal landscape, and two are how we show up relationally. We're giving folks, again, not in a coherent, uh, well thought out way. We're attempting to give people some of the relational skills, but have totally bypassed the foundation of the internal landscape first, right? So self awareness, depending on which model you subscribe to, maybe it's self management, etc. I like to just call that the nervous system world.
Yeah.
We've just got a profession of people functioning on autopilot, and until we get to start to change that, I know that there's a lot of things that are working well and things that need to be shifted, but this autopilot that part scares me. That part scares me.
Yeah. The Well, yeah. I mean, and well, I again, it's, you brought up that we just don't have time. But I also believe that veterinarians, well, I believe I've been a veterinarian. I know I'm stubborn. We are a stubborn profession. There's the older generation, we're still, rub some dirt on it, keep going. You'll be okay. Where I'm hoping this younger generation will start to instill a change, which is like, hey, I need 30 minutes to just sit here and decompress, or 30 minutes I need to talk to someone on the phone. I really need to, or a team member, or my mentor, or somebody to just, after a traumatic thing, such as a euthanasia or a client upset or a case that's just not responding like it should, give them those 30 minutes to decompress, talk to someone, do that. I really think that's one of the things we need to do. Um, I but how do you implement that? How do you implement that when the Excel spreadsheet does not tell the people in charge this is what needs to be done?
So, what I'm starting to, well, not starting, what I have been doing with folks for quite some time, whether I'm getting to meet them one to one or it's through my psychoeducation, is I'm starting more with what I call micro moments of recovery, because the 30 minutes
Mhm.
ain't happening.
Right.
It's not coming anytime soon. So what I'm trying to support my clients through is let's get to understand how your all of our nervous systems work the same way, but how has your nervous system learned to adapt? Because it's not the same for everyone. We build that awareness first. Once we build that awareness, we are in a better position to understand what your nervous system needs throughout the day. Here's like the analogy I use is we are not, so think of a light switch. We're not meant to be on all day, but yet we're in environments that force us to be on. Reality is we don't get to go down because the pace and the work requires us to be on. So what if we start to think of this as a dimmer switch, and a micro moment of recovery might mean 5 seconds, 10, 15, 30 seconds of, depending on the state that your nervous system is in, bringing it back to even temporary moments of downshifting, of a little bit more groundedness, of a little bit more present awareness to give your body what it needs. So, example, let's come back to the example of the client interaction. And yeah, I don't have time to go feel that out, process it, talk to anybody. But what I teach my clients is to do is real time, recognize through somatic awareness what is actually happening inside of my body. And where the goal here is to not always push the sensations away, it is to work with the sensations. Example, the person might tighten up their fists under the table and they feel a little bit of that frustration or rage, like really feel it. And then you release your fists and you do that a few times. That's an example of a micro moment of recovery where you're not, what's the word I'm looking for? You are not abandoning your body and your heart. You're recognizing it needs a quick hit of something, and a quick hit of something is better than no hits at all. So we're constantly looking at how do we dim the switch throughout the day, because if we're thinking about it from a nervous system perspective, even a cortisol perspective, the nervous system needs to learn that it can get back into moments of safety. Otherwise, we will consistently stay all the way in the on or all the way in the off. The on is the hypervigilance, and the off is total shutdown. We're not actually meeting people where they are. So I do see a lot of improvements when people are able to adapt to the micro moments versus the 30 minutes. Obviously, 30 minutes would be ideal.
Yeah, would be. How long does it take for you to, I don't want to say train people, but just help people realize they're having those issues and they need a micro moment? I mean, that's not something that on average, I mean, yeah, there's some people that might understand it after a quick 10-minute discussion.
Yeah.
There's some that might need 6 months. How long does the program take for them to really know what's going on inside of them internally and realize, hey, I need a second?
It varies. And I think a lot of it depends on where someone is at with the spectrum of autopilot to self connection. Because I have worked with some people who are already more in the realm of self connection. They can have moments of present moment awareness. They can still feel those hits of joy, connection, creativity, laughter. Their ventral vagal state is more on, alive, and kicking. And for them, the ability to switch into this is much faster. Sometimes I'll hear wins from even just a 1 day training or a half day training I do with the team, and people will come back and say, yeah, that was really helpful. I was able to take the 15, 30 seconds. But when I'm working with people who are in pure autopilot and survival mode, that's where it's going to take a lot longer, because the adaptive patterns are built in so strong that we cannot expect that the armor is just going to soften in 1 day, 1 week, 1 month. That is a process. And that process will be served much better when someone is able to engage in more personalized support. That might be therapy, etc.
In your opinion,
Yeah.
what is the hardest thing veterinarians have to deal with? And I know it depends on each person, but what is it? Is it client? Is it euthanasia? Is it cost of care? Or which one do you think causes the most harm to the veterinarian's psyche right now?
I've been thinking a lot about this, and past versions of me would have just stuck to it depends, it depends. But the current version of me will say the moral complexity of the work that remains unspoken about and therefore unaddressed. Hands down.
So moral injury.
Mm.
Is it?
I believe that that is very close to the top, if not at the top.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the qualitative section of my dissertation, it basically looked it it brought out a lot of stuff, and it made me realize that the amazing research that has been done has just been looking at outcomes, right? The very end. There hasn't been a lot that's looked upstream away from that. And my qualitative section, 18 out of the 18 interviewees that I had I think out of 1,080 quotes that I had, 497 of them had to deal with moral injury. So it sent me down that rabbit hole. You know, I talked to Dr. Wendy Dean. I looked at everything, and I really didn't find a brief, easy moral injury scale. So I created one. And that's my second paper in my 2-paper dissertation. Is
Hmm.
it's a 10-question moral injury scale. Um, I really believe now, especially with where cost of care is,
Mhm.
corporate ownership,
Yeah.
um, you know, I think moral injury is absolutely, I would have to say, close to the top.
Yeah.
The second thing I found, and it's a new construct I came up with, is an idea of career identity disillusionment, which is you talk to any veterinarian. There are very few veterinarians that decided in vet school, I'm going to be a veterinarian. Most veterinarians, they came up with the concept at 8, 10, and they start building their identity their whole way. And their identity is built that way. Their social identity is built that way. You know, their parents, oh, Susie's going to be a veterinarian. The town knows Susie. She's going to be a veterinarian. And you know, you go through life building to become a veterinarian, whether it's your education, sacrifices, cost, time, all these things you won't get back. And then, you know, they're thrown into the profession. Well, not thrown in, they enter the profession, and they're like, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what my 8-year-old dream of being a veterinarian was like. Do you hear a lot of that?
Yep. All the time, every single day, all the time. And I really appreciate the framing of the career identity bit, because when we're thinking about identity, a very big part of that is what are the values that guide how I view the world, how I view the work, how I view myself, etc. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot, yes, there's the, I'm really not trying to minimize this part of it. It holds its own weight. The access to care issues, absolutely, absolutely. And the piece that I'm seeing more and more is what in the literature is termed as organizational betrayal. This one is coming up on the daily. And I'm still in the process of trying to wrap my head around how to explain this in the way that I see it every day. But in its most simplest form, I signed on to this practice because I was told you believe in this, you practice from this approach. These are the values you have plastered over your wall. This is how you've positioned yourself,
Marketed yourself.
marketed yourself.
Yep.
I now come into practice, and there's such a discrepancy between what I was told and what I see. And what the feeling underneath that is betrayal. Like when you're betrayed in a relationship, we know that feeling.
Right.
But the framing of it is not necessarily there that way. But what's happening is people are being pulled away from their identity, but their core values without knowing that's what's happening. I'll use the most simplest example that doesn't hold a lot of emotional weight to it, but my work ethic. I'm coming in knowing that I pay attention to every little thing that I do because I know the risks, I know what's on the line. But then you have me working under conditions where I'm rushed. I don't even have space to have a conversation in quiet. I'm bumping shoulders with the person next to me. There's so much stimulation. I don't get to finish one thing before I have to do five others. And then I leave and I go home at night and I think back, I'm like, what did I actually achieve? I remember all the corners that I had to cut. That's an example of the pull that we feel away from our core values, and the research is clear on this. When I don't, or I'm not able to live in alignment with those values, I will feel inner chaos, and that's what's happening. What's so fascinating is in my work I see over like 50 veterinary and animal care professionals a month, and there will always be some that our focus is on challenging euthanasias, a critical incident where I was exposed to something very traumatic. That will come up, but that is not the bulk
It
of what
isn't.
I see. It's the organizational betrayal.
And it's crazy. Um, and by organizational betrayal, that is moral injury as well.
That's it. Exactly.
It is. I mean, so basically my moral injury scale is broken into three things. Number one, uh, let's just call it economic euthanasia because of cost of care. Because we've made owning a pet a luxury item. It's disgusting. Um, Number two is, expecting you to see more with less, see more patients, but you're going to have less staff, less technology. You're not going to have as much time with your patients or your clients. The, but when you look at moral injury, the one thing that really got me was, and I still like on my other platform, Driving Veterinary Medicine, we talk about what you do, and people bring up KPIs all the time. They bring up KPIs, which is what is the average client transaction? How much income did you bring in? Or how much discount are you giving as a veterinarian? Blah, blah, blah. It keeps going like that. My thing is, what, I, I feel like veterinary medicine just needs a complete control, alt, delete. Like we start over again, but we can't, that's not going to happen. But the thing is, like, would it really be that bad if we looked at, hey, this client gave you a 5-star review. This client loves you. This client said they'll only see you. This client totally loves the practice
Mhm.
and can't believe how great this place is. Cannot believe how happy her pet was when it came in. I mean, I think those are some of the things we really need to start looking at. And I just don't know who to talk to or where to start or where do we go from when it comes to this. But I mean, the moral injury piece is huge. And I'm hoping with my moral injury scale, people like you can just give it out because it's 10 questions, 10 simple questions that people can answer. And you can just kind of see what's going on. And you want to talk about psychological safety. If people feel that there's moral injury, psychological safety doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Also, my dissertation showed that the emotional demands of this profession are so high,
Yeah.
psychological safety doesn't even matter.
Hmm.
Resilience does. Resilience does. The demands that are put on us does, But psychological safety, which I was shocked, didn't move the needle. It
It's
had
valid.
did not move the needle, at least on my sample. I'm not saying other things are wrong, but at least the way I set it up, it didn't help with mental distress. And I used the depression, anxiety, stress score for mental distress because it's a very simple thing to use. Um,
Well, can I
so
come back to something, a
yeah,
connection, right, between the conversations around moral injury and even when you were just giving the examples of client satisfaction, the way, so what I'm actually hearing in that is the impact that we are able to achieve through our work. And obviously, that is so important because this is ultimately mission driven work. And when we're looking at moral injury, moral distress, or moral injury, we know that one of the protective factors is what is called moral realignment or moral alignment. I understand that in this scenario, I may not be able to have the impact that I believe I can. And so sometimes I also need to be able to look at, well, where am I?
hmm
And when we are able to notice, not just individually, but as a team and as a practice, where the impact is still strong, it's not meant to take away the pain that we can't, but it offers our system a little bit of balance in
right.
that I'm not totally helpless. I'm not totally useless here. Because that's, we know, right, that those feelings of helplessness and despair and apathy and sometimes shame are very much present with moral injury. Well, then we also have to be shifting our practices to acknowledge that. And if all systemic conditions can't be resolved, then a harm reduction approach teaches us, well, what can we do with the environment we're in? And there is nothing stopping us from consciously noticing the impact that we have. We know that's a strong buffer for compassion satisfaction. But yet, the culture we are in, it's always the what's not happening, what's not working, what's not enough. And yeah,
And,
so I see that connection very strongly.
yeah, and and the thing is like it exactly. Are Is it because we are such perfectionists? We're always worried about what we're not doing right, or is that a human trait?
I mean, I'm sure there's some degree of all of it, right? But I also believe that the expectations placed from, I'll just use this term loosely, leadership on what matters for our practice drives the show. And so the metrics that are being used to measure quote unquote success are going to guide where our attention goes. And if attention is not being strategically placed on the wins and the impact, then it's not going to go there.
You also said at the very beginning, and and some of the things I've read from you, trauma exposed by nature. That's what this profession is. Can you define that in simple terms,
In
or
helping, yeah,
or even give an example?
yeah. In helping professions, there is an inherent exposure to the pain and suffering of others. And so our clients and our animals may be experiencing trauma. Trauma here meaning something out of the ordinary that overwhelms someone's capacity to cope in the moment. And in vet med, you've got a bit of that double whammy. You have exposure to patient trauma and client trauma, where I do not tend to see more of the distress. This is just my observation. I don't tend to see a lot of distress coming from the exposure to patient trauma because folks are trained to know what to do with that. Now, that's not to suggest there might be critical incidents where we're exposed to really graphic things that don't do a number on us. It happens, obviously. But where I tend to see more of the distress build is in the human to human interactions. So when I say that it's an inherently trauma exposed field, some of that trauma exposure is built into human and animal existence. Animals are going to suffer, they're going to die. Humans are going to be in places where they're emotionally distraught, overwhelmed. Like, you can't help it. It's the nature of the work. And we have an additional layer of that trauma exposure that's being caused by the way our practices run, that it doesn't need to be this way. Example is everything that we were just talking about with the moral complexity. It does not have to be this way, where we are exposed to morally complex situations and we do nothing to process them. When I'm training teams and I ask them, we're talking about debriefing, and I ask, do you do ethics rounds? What's an ethics round? In social work practice, in a lot of human medicine, that's part and parcel, because we understand that if you do not address the exposure, it will start to simmer inside of you.
Well, let's talk about that.
Hmm.
I'm just curious on what you would think to this, because obviously you ACEs, childhood trauma.
Yep.
I would love to know. And there hasn't been a study done yet that's been published that I know of. Childhood trauma. How many veterinarians have a high ACEs score? Do you think there is some correlation between childhood trauma and being a veterinarian?
I think you can extrapolate that to all helping professions. This is the same conversation we're having in social work. This is the same conversation that's happening in, I'm going to, similar conversations happening in human healthcare too. Because when we start, I'll give you an example. I taught social work for many years. And one of the things that we did with our students very early on is try to get very curious about what has actually brought you into this profession. And without a shadow of a doubt, not necessarily relating it back to ACEs specifically, but it was lived experience that drew people into this field, their own exposure to pain, suffering, and then, wanting to get into a place of channeling that energy. I don't see how vet med would be drastically different, but the one nuance I'm getting more and more curious about, and one day I would love to explore how this could potentially get researched, is the role of animals in supporting us through hardships in our life. So I'd be really curious to see what's happening for folks at younger ages, maybe even into adolescence, where animals have been their source of safety in situations where humans have not. And so then forms that really deep bond. And I go into a field because that bond is what I equate with safety. It's connection. This is where I feel most alive. This is where I feel like I can put my guards down. And that part of the work, everyone I work with the exception of a very few, find that part of the work incredibly satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
And then the human exposure, that's where the stuff starts to come up.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I mean, if we knew more than we kind of know now, if we looked at upstream stuff more than outcomes, I
Yeah.
think we would start getting a lot more information and being able to set up systems that are different. Because exactly what you just said, some sort of childhood trauma, and how did an animal help them cope? That would be very interesting to know, because is that why these hard cases, these euthanasias, these absolutely heartbreaking situations that veterinarians are in resonate so much stronger? Is it more than just quote unquote perfectionism?
Oh, yeah. I believe it absolutely is.
You are sending me down one rabbit hole after another now. Well,
Hmm.
I think, I think, and because I know you have something to do,
Hmm.
so I'm just going to call this interview part one,
I love that.
because we have a couple of different things we can continue to talk about.
Yeah.
And I really I love the fact that you and I are almost in alignment with, how we're thinking, which is we're thinking further. Let's go back further than look at outcomes, because I
Yeah.
really see outcomes as, you're behind the eight ball. I Now I can't find any data anywhere, and I'm wondering if you know,
Hmm.
veterinarians who say they're quote unquote burnout.
Hmm.
And the problem with burnout is that, if we don't know what's going on with someone, we just say they're burnout.
That's
I mean, yeah,
that, right.
the burnout drawer is that junk drawer that's just picked up all this stuff.
Such a
But
good analogy. Yeah.
so my thing is like, if someone who says they're burnout in this profession, what are their what percentages of people come back successfully after they make that statement?
Oof. Come back from what? Like time off, recovery?
Yeah, and can
I
they
don't know.
get out of that burnout state that they're in?
I know of no study. Um, and how do you recover if you're coming back into a system that has the same conditions that were present when you left? This is where it gets a little bit mm, subjective, because
Exact.
I know some people who believe you can.
But that was my exact argument. Like, they're like, "Oh, go take a 3 week hiatus, go take a vacation." But you said the exact golden words that I said. But they go right back into the same situation.
Yeah.
So do they get
It,
like
to me, it
three
doesn't make
days?
so no, but I know of some people, and I don't know enough about their work, but some folks who have like sort of like burnout recovery models to how they coach and support people, which I am going to imagine and believe has tremendous value, because the thinking there is I cannot change the environment around me. So how do I adjust myself, better understand myself, take care of myself while I'm within that system? And I've seen some degree of shifts, positive shifts that can happen that way. But I guess the question becomes, what is the definition of recovery? Um, because I have a hard time wrapping my head around how I can be fully alive, fully myself, if I'm coming back into the same system. I might learn how to manage myself better, but recovery, I don't, if burnout is inherently a systemically caused thing with some personal factors influencing it, then by definition, does the recovery not need to happen at a systemic level too?
It's a systems problem. It is a systems problem. And I
Yeah,
know people get so mad when you say that. Oh, what are you going to do with the system? Well, there's all these small areas you can kind of disrupt and change the way we're doing
exactly.
something. We don't have to change the whole circle.
You
You
bet.
just got to disrupt it here and there, just
Exactly.
so it's not a 360 anymore.
Example, I was working with an organization over the last year on improving, from a systems level, how they understand and respond to critical incidents, all the way to a framework, an SOP, training for leadership and staff, and then getting into the weeds on, hey, listen, you're working with somebody, you've got a colleague or a staff member that's in distress. How do you support them in that moment? And shifts, positive shifts are happening. The way that they're responding to critical incidents now is leaps and bounds better than how they were a year ago. That's how you change systems.
Right. Little pieces here and there.
Little pieces, and those little pieces can have profound impact. I don't subscribe to all or nothing thinking.
Yeah.
I can't.
Right. Last question.
Yes.
Do you think veterinary medicine wants to change, or do you think it has to change?
It has to change. Some want to change, and there's so many that are still stuck in autopilot that they don't even know what they want.
Yeah. Well, Ange, thank you so much for being here today. If anyone wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way they can get a hold of you?
I would say just if you're on social, just follow me on social media. That's a great way to get me. Right now, the handle's at Veterinary Wellbeing Coach. That's going to change in the days to come, or just shoot me over an email. So,
It's
Angie,
going to change. You're changing. You're
yeah,
changing your identity.
I'm changing my identity. I am not a coach. I used that language when I lacked a lot of awareness on what I was doing, and it was catchy. But I'm more than a coach, and so that's going to be shifting. I actually think the best ways for now, just visit my website, www.angiearora.com. Aurora without a U.
Don't worry, it will be put on the screen for everyone to see.
Oh, I
Well,
get it all the time.
Angie, thank you so much, and to the listeners, thank you so much. You know, obviously, it's very important that we know ourselves and know when we need help, and we reach out for help. And it's better to do it early than later because you get a better chance of recovery. So thank you for listening again, Ange. Thank you for being here. And we'll talk to all of you next time on Irreplaceable Truths.